The priest came to the village and fell in love with a 20-year-old parishioner, and this is how their romance ends. In a quiet village where life followed the same rhythm every day, no one expected a story like this to unfold. When a young priest arrived, he was seen as a figure of respect, discipline, and distance. But what no one knew was that his arrival would spark emotions he himself had never dared to face. Among the faces in the congregation, one stood out, a 20-year-old parishioner whose presence challenged everything he thought he knew about faith, love, and desire. What began as innocent conversations soon grew into something neither of them could control. Their bond became impossible to ignore, even as fear and guilt pressed against them. And as the walls closed in, the village unaware of the fire burning in silence, the story of their secret romance reached a moment that no one, not even they, could have imagined. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring more emotional and thought-provoking stories straight to you. Stay with me until the end, because what happens when love collides with faith will leave you questioning everything you thought you understood about loyalty, courage, and the human heart. When Father Gabriel first arrived in the village, I remember how everyone whispered about him. He was different from the priests we had known before. Tall, with sharp features softened only by a warm smile, he carried himself with a quiet dignity that made people lean in when he spoke. To the rest of the parish, he was simply their new priest, a man chosen to guide them in faith. But to me, from the very beginning, there was something more, something I couldn't quite explain. I was only 20, restless and full of questions about life. The village often felt too small, too narrow for the dreams that buzzed in my chest. Yet, on the first Sunday he delivered his sermon, I felt stillness wash over me. His voice was low and steady, as if he wasn't just speaking words, but reaching into the air and pulling out truths meant only for me. After the service, I lingered outside, pretending to study the old stone walls of the chapel. But in truth, I was waiting. When Father Gabriel stepped out, greeting people with gentle nods, his eyes landed on me. It was only for a second, but it felt as though he saw through every layer of me. "You're new to me," he said as he approached, his tone kind but curious. I swallowed hard. "I've been here all my life. You're the new one." He smiled faintly at my response, a smile that softened his serious face. "Then perhaps you'll help me understand this place. I'd like to know what home means here." The conversation was simple, brief, even, but when I walked away, my heart pounded with a rhythm I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just admiration. It was fascination, and it unsettled me. Over the weeks that followed, I found myself going to church more often, not out of devotion, but because I wanted to be near him. I watched the way he spoke with the elderly, always patient, always listening. I noticed the way children ran to him, as if sensing he carried no judgment in his hands. Yet, when our eyes met, there was always a pause, a flicker, something I couldn't name but felt deeply. One evening, I stayed behind after Mass to help put away hymnals. The chapel was nearly empty, shadows from the stained glass windows stretching long across the floor. I didn't hear him approach until his voice broke the silence. "You work hard for this parish," he said softly. I turned, startled, the book slipping from my hands. I don't mind helping." He bent down, picking up the book before I could. His hand brushed mine briefly, and though it lasted no more than a breath, it sent a jolt through me. He hesitated too, his eyes catching mine, and for a moment the silence between us grew heavy, charged. I stepped back quickly, my chest tight. I should go. He nodded, but his gaze lingered, as if words were building inside him that he dared not speak. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, a trick of my imagination, but the memory of his touch wouldn't fade. Worse, the look in his eyes haunted me. It wasn't the gaze of a priest toward a parishioner. It was something far more dangerous. The following days, I tried to avoid him. I helped my father in the fields, stayed away from the chapel except on Sundays, but still, I couldn't stop thinking about him. Every word he had spoken, every smile, every glance replayed in my mind. And then, fate interfered. One afternoon, I was walking back on the river when a sudden storm broke. The rain was relentless, soaking me through within seconds. I sprinted toward the nearest shelter, which happened to be the rectory. Hesitant, shivering, I knocked. Father Gabriel opened the door. His expression shifted quickly from surprise to concern. "You'll catch cold," he said, ushering me inside without waiting for permission. He handed me a towel, his hands steady, his movements precise, but his eyes betrayed something else. We sat across from each other at a wooden table, the sound of rain pounding against the roof. He asked about my family, my studies, my plans for the future. His questions were ordinary, but the way he listened made them extraordinary. No one had ever cared to ask me what I wanted. Not really. Yet he leaned forward, his chin resting lightly on his hand, as if every word mattered. For the first time, I admitted aloud what I had always felt, that the village was too small for me, that I dreamed of more, but didn't know how to reach it. He didn't laugh. He didn't dismiss me. Instead, he said quietly, "There's strength in you, more than you realize." The words lodged in my chest, warm and painful all at once. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to lean into that warmth, to ask him what else he saw in me. But I didn't. When the rain finally eased, I rose to leave. At the door, I hesitated. He reached out, his hand almost touching my arm before he pulled back, as though burned by his own impulse. "Be careful," he said in a voice barely above a breath. I nodded, stepping out into the damp evening. My heart raced as I walked home, my clothes still clinging wet to my skin. What was happening between us? Was it only in my imagination, or was there truly something building? Something we both feared and yet couldn't resist? As I reached the edge of the village, I stopped, staring back at the chapel steeple cutting into the gray sky. I knew, in that moment, that I couldn't keep pretending. I had to move closer to him, no matter the cost. And that decision, reckless, terrifying, irresistible, would change everything. The decision I had made at the edge of the village pressed on me every day that followed. I told myself I would find a way to be closer to Father Gabriel, though I had no clear plan. It was reckless, maybe even dangerous, but the pull I felt was stronger than reason. The chance came sooner than I expected. After Sunday Mass, I lingered again in the chapel, pretending to arrange hymnals. The congregation trickled out, their footsteps fading into the cobblestone square. I could feel him behind me before I heard his voice. "You stay behind often," he said in a low tone, not accusing, more curious than anything. I turned, heart racing. I like the quiet. It feels different when everyone's gone. He smiled faintly. "Yes, there's a peace here in the silence." He paused, watching me. "But peace doesn't seem to be what you're searching for." The word struck me harder than I expected. My throat tightened, and for a moment, I had no reply. He wasn't wrong. I wasn't searching for peace. I was searching for him. I managed to say, "Maybe I'm looking for something I don't understand yet." His expression softened, but there was something restrained in his eyes, as though he wanted to say more but couldn't. He walked closer, taking one of the hymnals from my hands and placing it neatly on the shelf. The nearness of him sent a shiver down my spine. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the things we don't understand are the ones that change us most." I could barely breathe as he stepped back, and then, as if realizing how close we had been, he cleared his throat, straightened his posture, and said briskly, "You should get some air. It's a fine evening." But I didn't leave. Instead, I asked, "Would you walk with me?" His eyes widened slightly, but after a long pause, he nodded. We walked through the village, the streets bathed in the golden light of sunset. We spoke about ordinary things at first, the harvest, the history of the chapel, the families he had already met. But slowly, the conversation grew deeper. He asked me about my childhood, about the dreams I confessed during the storm when I was trapped in his rectory. I told him more this time, how I want to see cities beyond the hills, to live a life where I wasn't just defined by the village or my family's expectations. "You have a restless spirit," he said, almost wistfully. "And you?" I asked, "What made you choose this life?" He was silent for a moment. His gaze drifted toward the horizon, where the sky burned orange. I thought faith would give me clarity. But sometimes, It gives me more questions than answers. His honesty startled me. Priests were supposed to be certain, unshakable. But here he was, confessing doubt, not in God, perhaps, but in himself. That vulnerability made me feel closer to him than ever. We walked until the sun slipped away, replaced by the cool hush of evening. When we returned to the chapel steps, he stopped and looked at me with an intensity that made my chest tighten. "Be careful with your questions," he said softly. "They can lead you to places you may not be ready to go." I wanted to answer, to tell him I wasn't afraid, that I wanted to go wherever those questions led if it meant being near him. But before I could, the chapel door opened. Mrs. Alvarez, an elderly woman from the parish, stepped out. "Father Gabriel," she exclaimed, clearly surprised to see us together. Her eyes flicked to me, narrowing ever so slightly. "I didn't realize you were still here." Gabriel's posture shifted instantly. He smiled politely, his hands folding behind his back, his priestly demeanor sliding back into place. "Just walking a parishioner home, Mrs. Alvarez. A priest's duty doesn't end with Mass." Her suspicious glance lingered, but she nodded and shuffled away. I stood frozen, heat rushing to my face. When she was gone, I turned to him, searching his eyes. "Is that what I am to you?" I asked quietly. "Just a duty?" His eyes darkened. For a heartbeat, he said nothing. Then, with a voice heavy with restraint, he replied, "You are much more than that, and that's what frightens me." The words hung between us, electric, dangerous. My breath caught, and I felt the ground tilt beneath me. Before I could respond, he stepped back toward the chapel. "Go home," he said firmly. "Please." I walked away in silence, my heart hammering in my chest. His confession had both thrilled and terrified me. He had admitted I was more than a duty, more than just another face in the congregation. But what did that mean? Was it longing in his voice, or fear of temptation? That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed his words over and over. Much more than that. That's what frightens me. What frightened him? What did he see in me that he couldn't reconcile with his vows? I lay awake until dawn, restless, torn between hope and dread. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't just a fleeting crush anymore. Something real was growing between us. Something neither of us could ignore. And if it frightened him, it terrified me even more. After that night, nothing felt the same between us. Every time I entered the chapel, I felt the weight of his words pressing on my chest. "You are much more than that, and that's what frightens me." They echoed in every hymn, in every prayer, in every glance that passed between us when no one else was looking. I told myself to stay away, to let the feelings dissolve into silence, but my heart betrayed me. Each time I tried to distance myself, I found a reason to return, helping with the children's choir, carrying boxes for food donations, even polishing the brass candlesticks. I told others I was volunteering, but deep down I knew I was chasing those fleeting moments when our eyes would meet. One evening, after everyone else had gone, I lingered in the pews, staring at the flickering candles. The chapel was nearly dark, filled with the smell of old wood and wax. I heard his footsteps approach, slow, deliberate. "You shouldn't be here this late," he said, his voice low, almost cautious. I looked up at him. "And yet you are." His lips tightened, as if I had struck a chord. He sat beside me, the distance between us small, but heavy with tension. For a long while we said nothing. The silence was thick, charged, until finally he spoke. "You don't understand the danger in this," he said softly, his eyes fixed on the altar. "For me, for you, if people even suspected—" He trailed off, his jaw clenching. "I don't care what they think," I whispered, the words spilling out before I could stop them. He turned sharply, his gaze piercing mine. "But I do. I have to. My vows, my duty, they don't allow me to—" He stopped himself, his hands curling into fists. "To what?" I pressed, my heart racing. To feel something real? The question hung in the air, raw and trembling. His breath caught, and for a moment, I thought he might finally say it, admit what had been building between us. But instead, he stood abruptly, pacing toward the back of the chapel. "This has to stop," he said, though his voice cracked on the last word. I wanted to answer, to argue, but before I could, the heavy wooden doors swung open. Two parishioners stepped inside, their chatter echoing against the stone walls. I froze, my chest tightening. Gabriel's back stiffened, and when he turned, his expression was perfectly calm, as though nothing had passed between us. "Good evening," he greeted them warmly, his priestly mask slipping back into place. I slipped out quietly, my stomach in knots. The distance between who he was in private and who he had to be in public was tearing me apart. The next day, I tried to lose myself in ordinary life. I worked with my father, hauling baskets of produce to market, listening half-heartedly to neighbors' gossip about weather and crops. But none of it distracted me. Every word, every laugh, every glance from others felt hollow compared to fire I felt when I was near him. By dusk, I couldn't resist. I found myself walking toward the rectory. The sky burned orange and crickets sang in the tall grass. My pulse quickened with each step. I knocked softly, half hoping he wouldn't answer. But he did. His eyes widened when he saw me. "You shouldn't be here," he said again, though his tone lacked conviction. "I had to see you," I admitted, my voice breaking. "I can't keep pretending nothing is happening between us." He stepped back, letting me in despite his words. The room was simple. Shelves of books, a small wooden desk, a crucifix on the wall. I stood awkwardly, my hands shaking. "Do you think this is easy for me?" he asked, his voice trembling now too. "Do you think I don't feel the same pull every time you're near?" The confession struck me like a blow. My chest tightened, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. "Then why keep fighting it?" "Because I have to," he said, his eyes burning. "Because once I stop, everything I built, everything I am, it unravels." I took a step closer, unable to hold back. "And what about me? Do I matter in that choice? Or am I just the temptation you're trying to silence?" His face twisted with anguish. He pressed a hand against his forehead, pacing. "You matter more than you should, more than I can admit." The air between us throbbed with unspoken words. I could feel it, the line between restraint and surrender thinning with each heartbeat. And then it happened. He stopped pacing, his eyes locking on mine with raw intensity. He stepped forward, so close I could feel the heat of his body. His hand lifted, trembling, as though fighting itself. He brushed his fingers against my cheek. The touch was hesitant, fleeting, but it ignited every nerve in me. "Gabriel," I breathed, my voice unsteady. His hand lingered for only a second before he pulled away sharply, as if the weight of what he'd done scorched him. His chest heaved, his eyes torn between desire and guilt. Before either of us could say another word, a loud knock rattled the rectory door. We froze, panic flooding the room. "Father Gabriel?" A voice called from outside. It was the mayor of the village. "We need you immediately. There's been an incident at the river." Gabriel's eyes widened. He looked at me, torn, before whispering, "Stay hidden." Then he opened the door, his voice steady again as he spoke with the mayor. I slipped into the shadows of the room, my heart pounding. The moment we had just shared burned in my skin, in my soul. His touch, his words, they proved what I had suspected all along. But now, with an incident calling him away, I was left trembling in the dark, consumed by the question that haunted me more than ever. Would he ever choose me over the life he had vowed to? The night at the river changed everything. I wasn't there when it happened, but the village buzzed with the story before dawn. A child had slipped on the wet rocks and been pulled under by the current. By the time Father Gabriel arrived, the boy was clinging to a branch, barely conscious. Gabriel didn't hesitate. He leapt into the rushing water and dragged the boy out with a strength no one expected from a priest. The boy survived. People hailed it as a miracle, a sign of divine protection, proof that Gabriel was sent to the village for a reason. I should have felt only pride in him, but jealousy burned in me too. Everyone saw him as untouchable, holy, flawless. Only I knew the truth of the man behind the collar, the one whose hand had trembled when he touched my cheek, the one who carried a battle inside him as fierce as any river. I went to see him the next day. He was in the rectory, a bandage wrapped around his arm where the rocks had cut him. He looked exhausted, his shoulders slumped. Yet when he saw me in the doorway, something flickered in his eyes, relief, maybe, or longing. "You shouldn't be here," he said, though softer this time, without the usual force. I stepped inside anyway. "Everyone in the village thinks you're a hero." His lips curved in a faint, bitter smile. "Heroes don't feel what I feel." I swallowed hard, the air thick between us. "And what do you feel?" He looked at me then, really looked, as if stripping away every shield I had. "Too much," he admitted. His voice was quiet, raw. "Too much for you, too much for me, too much for the vows I swore." I moved closer, my heart hammering. Then maybe those vows are wrong. Maybe what we feel is worth more than promises made to silence a part of yourself. His eyes darkened, his jaw tightening, as if he were holding back words that could burn us both. Before he could answer, there was a sharp knock at the door. Father Gabriel. It was Mrs. Alvarez, her voice urgent. "The mayor needs you again. The villagers want to speak about the flood." Gabriel stiffened, his mask sliding back into place. He opened the door only a crack, his voice firm and priestly. "Tell them I will come soon." When she left, he shut the door, leaning his forehead against the wood. I saw the weight pressing down on him, heavier than the soaked robes from a night before. "I can't breathe in this life anymore," he whispered, so low I almost didn't hear. I reached out, touching his hand. He didn't pull away. Instead, his fingers curled around mine, trembling. "Then don't live the life they forced on you," I said. "Live the one you want." His hand tightened, and for a fleeting second, I thought he would pull me closer, that the wall between us would finally shatter. But then he let go, stepping back. "You don't understand," he said, his voice breaking. "If anyone knew, if they even suspected, they'd destroy me. And maybe you too." I stared at him, my chest aching. "So what? We just keep pretending." His silence was answer enough. The days that followed only deepened the tension. The flood had damaged fields, and Gabriel spent his hours helping villagers rebuild, carrying lumber, hauling sandbags, his collar stained with sweat. Everywhere he went, people praised him, and I followed at a distance, aching for the man no one else saw. One evening, I found him alone at the chapel, wiping mud from the pews. His sleeves were rolled up, his skin bronzed from the sun. He looked tired, but when he saw me, the corners of his mouth lifted slightly. "You shouldn't always seek me out," he said, though there was no heat in his words. "I can't help it," I admitted. We worked in silence for a while, scrubbing and sweeping. The silence grew heavy, weighted with everything unspoken. Finally, he set down the rag, leaning against the altar. "You don't realize what you're doing to me," he said, his eyes locking onto mine. "Every time you look at me, every time you stay when you should go, you're breaking me." I walked closer, my pulse racing. "Maybe I'm not breaking you. Maybe I'm saving you." His breath caught. His hand lifted as if to touch me again, but he stopped himself, his fist tightening at his side. Before either of us could speak, the chapel doors burst open. The mayor entered, followed by 2 councilmen. Their faces were grim. "Father Gabriel," the mayor said, "there are rumors spreading. People say you spend too much time with one particular parishioner. They question your devotion." The blood drained from my face. Gabriel's expression didn't flicker, though his knuckles whitened as he gripped the altar. "Rumors are dangerous things," he said calmly. "They reveal more about those who spread them than those they target." The men exchanged glances, but said no more. When they left, the heavy doors thudding shut, I felt my knees weaken. "They know," I whispered. Gabriel's face was pale, his eyes haunted. "Not yet, but if we're not careful, they will." I stepped closer, my voice trembling. "Then what happens to us?" He looked at me with such anguish it nearly broke me. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I fear we're standing on a cliff, and one wrong step will send us both over the edge." The words hung in the air, sharper than any blade. And as I walked home under the weight of the darkening sky, one truth burned in me. Whatever was happening between us was no longer just a secret. It was a spark threatening to set fire to the entire village. The night after the festival felt endless. I lay awake, the memory of his lips still burning on mine. But so too did the weight of the stairs, the accusations, the silence that followed us like a curse. Every whisper in the streets now seemed louder, sharper, filled with venom. And though no one dared confront us directly, I could feel the shift in the air. Suspicion had become certainty. The next morning, the chapel was fuller than ever. People came not just to pray, but to watch. I sat in the back pew, my pulse racing as Gabriel stepped to the altar. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion. He spoke of compassion, of truth, of courage. But every word seemed aimed at me, as though he was preaching not to the congregation, but to the one person he could no longer ignore. When Mass ended, no one rushed to greet him. Instead, groups lingered outside, whispering, pointing. I slipped out quickly, unwilling to face their judgment. Hours later, as dust settled, Gabriel found me by the river, the same place where our lips had finally met. His face was pale, his jaw tense. "It's worse than I thought," he admitted. "The mayor came to me this morning. He asked directly if the rumors were true." My chest tightened. "What did you say?" "I told him there was nothing to confess," Gabriel said, his voice hollow. "But I don't know how much longer they'll believe it." The words cut deeper than I wanted them to. I turned away, staring at the current. "So what happens now? Do we just keep denying everything, pretending this isn't real?" He stepped closer, his hand hovering near mine, but not daring to touch. "I don't want to pretend anymore," he whispered. "But if I choose you, I lose everything. My position, the respect of the people, the vows I swore. And if you don't choose me..." My voice cracked. "Then what do I lose?" "Everything I've risked, everything I felt, just to stand here with you." The silence stretched unbearable. The river roared louder, as if demanding an answer he couldn't give. Finally, he whispered, "I love you." The words broke me open. For a moment, nothing else mattered. Not the village, not the whispers, not the vows. Just those 3 words, raw and trembling, spilling from the lips of a man who had fought them for too long. I turned to him, tears burning in my eyes. "Then let's stop hiding." He pulled me into his arms, holding me tightly, as though he feared the world might rip me away. His breath was hot against my ear. "I don't know what the future holds. Maybe they'll cast me out. Maybe they'll hate me. But I'd rather face that than spend another day lying to myself." We stood there, clinging to each other, the stars unfolding above us. For the first time, I felt the weight of freedom, even if it came with the risk of ruin. In the weeks that followed, Gabriel stepped back from the pulpit. He told the mayor he needed time, that his heart was torn between duty and truth. People whispered louder than ever, but some voices softened. A few even defended him, saying a man of faith was still a man, capable of love like anyone else. As for me, I learned something deeper than desire. I learned that courage isn't found in silence or secrecy. It's found in standing beside someone when the world demands you step away. Looking back, I don't know if our story will end in exile or acceptance, but I know this. The moment Gabriel chose to speak the words aloud, to say he loved me despite everything, was the moment I found the strength to love myself too. And maybe that's what this story is really about, not just forbidden love, but the discovery that even in the harshest judgment, there is freedom in truth. So I ask you now, watching this, what chains are you still carrying? What truths are you afraid to speak? Because sometimes the life you dream of is waiting just beyond the fear of being seen. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who believes in the courage of love. Together, we can keep telling stories that remind us of what truly matters.